right, so as we think of mission being greater than the ask, let's look at our agenda. So we're going to have a brief introduction, then we'll look at the challenge that our churches can face related to mission and stewardship. I'll give you a good foundation on which to build as you think about how you articulate your ministry's mission. And then we'll see the connection between that mission and stewardship. We'll tie directly to what we talked about last week when we look at mission this week. And then again, we'll have time for conversation at that end. So if you've ever been a part of anything MFA has done for stewardship, you know we always start with the Bible, with God, with Jesus, with Scripture. So we're going to do that, of course, again today and look at this question. Did Jesus have a mission statement? So centering your church's stewardship ministry on Jesus is always the right first step to take. So when we think about mission being greater than the ask, let's see what the answer to this question is. Does Jesus agree about having a mission statement? And why, yes, I think that he would. We're in this passage from Luke chapter 4. Jesus is reading from Isaiah in the synagogue, and he proclaims that he is the anointed one. He is the Messiah, and he's connecting his mission to that prophecy that's in Isaiah and revealing how he is part of God's plan. So that part of God's plan, his mission, is really specific, as you see here in these verses. He shares who he is for. He describes the change that he exists to create. And his mission is rooted in the power of God, not in institution like the church, right? This is about God. Jesus is on a mission for God. So this is essentially a wonderful mission statement. Jesus doesn't say, I exist to love God and to love people. Certainly he did. But he names, again, exactly who he's for, what they need, and what's going to be different because he showed up. So we have a good step in the right direction when we start thinking about church and mission and stewardship as we look at this passage of Scripture in Jesus' golden mission. So second question, what is your church for? If I join you on Sunday for worship and I start talking to people and say, hey, what is X Moravian Church for? What would they tell me? And do you think that every person would have the same answer? Probably not. This is kind of an uncomfortable truth for a lot of churches. We presume everybody knows what the church is for, but we don't always teach that and preach that. So if people in your church can't tell me what it's for, then certainly people outside the church that you hope will be a part of it probably don't understand what it's for. And we know that people tend not to give to things that they don't understand or describe. And we're going to talk more about that in a later part of our time together today. But last session, we looked at what your church believes about stewardship. So today we're going to ask, what does your church do with the generosity that it receives? That stewardship belief is inviting people to give, and then the mission is what you do with those gifts, the work that you're about. Jesus knew what he was about, so let's make sure our churches know what they are about too. So let's dive into that together. First, let's talk a little bit about the challenge that exists in this space. I know a lot of our churches have mission statements, but sometimes there's a difference between that and a living mission. What does that mean? Statement is something you put on the website, it's printed in your materials, but is it actively a part of the congregation's life and rhythm? So a living mission is one that is known, it is owned, it is felt by the people that are part of your community of faith. And this difference matters tremendously for stewardship because research consistently shows that while some people will give to the church out of loyalty, habit, or even obligation, many will not, especially younger generations. They need an answer to that, what is your church for question. And not what churches in general are for, what the Moravian Church is for, but what is your church for, your church in your neighborhood at this moment in time. What are you for, and what might be lost if you cease to exist? So that what is your church for question, if it's not answered, some challenges can come up. First is the question here, giving issue or a clarity issue. You're saying people aren't giving as much as we'd like. We're having trouble recruiting volunteers, getting financial donations, etc. Are people clear on what they're being asked to give to. Again, this is mission and clarity of mission. So it could be that you don't have a giving issue, but possibly just a clarity issue. Another thing that can arise is that if you're not clear on your mission, then giving can be obligatory, not an investment in the ministry. So if people give because they feel like they should, or because they always have, or because they don't want the church to struggle, that's a shaky foundation for long-term stewardship. Sometimes that kind of giving levels off, it can decline, or it can even disappear. So again, you just want to be careful that as you understand the reasoning of why people are making their gifts, is it, again, because they feel like they should, or they've always have, they're not even thinking about it. Just a shaky ground, shaky foundation for your stewardship, if that's the case. Another challenge that can arise is that giving becomes about the church versus about what the church is doing. So help us meet our budget is an institutional ask, right? It says we need money to survive. It doesn't say why that survival matters, especially to anyone besides the church's own members. So younger donors especially are particularly motivated to give to organizations that they believe in, whose work is making a difference in the world, that they can see and be a part of. They want to be a part of mission. So be careful as you're thinking about how you invite people into stewardship for your ministry, that it's not an institutional ask, that it's about the mission of the church. And then finally, if the church isn't clear on why it exists, again, especially beyond its own members and its own member-serving activities and programs, then it's in danger of becoming a country club. It's becoming internally motivated, and not about it being a community of faith that's actively seeking to take on Jesus' mission as its own, right? So inward-facing churches tell their community we exist for ourselves. And that's not a strong reason for many people to get involved or even to give. When MMFA does feasibility studies, we always ask people to share the top 3 organizations that they support financially. And typically the church is always one of them. And so then when I will ask, well, tell me about the other 2 organizations that you like to support. And why. The answers are often very different, church versus the other 2. So people oftentimes attribute their support of their church to deep loyalty, years of involvement, roots that they have in the ministry, versus their support of other organizations, more often than not, is linked to they believe in what those charities are doing, the difference that those charities are making. So if that is part of the answer that I hear from somebody, I always then ask, do you believe in what your church is doing? And unfortunately, sometimes the responses reflect this lack of clarity about mission that we've just been talking about. And it's a risk that our churches are taking when they're relying only on those years, those roots, the loyalty as the motivation for generosity. It doesn't mean people aren't giving. Again, I'm just saying it's giving you a shaky foundation and certainly can impact your long-term vitality as a church. So let's dig in a little bit into how you make mission be the foundation of asking. And this, again, this is financial ask, but also just volunteer and other kinds of asks that the church may undertake. And let's just start by saying that asking is not the first step in stewardship, right? Your mission is. So people like to give to work such as hungry people being fed, lonely people finding community, the neighborhood being cared for, hope being shared. Again, last week we talked about gratitude as a motivation for generosity, but you can't invite people to give from a place of gratitude if you can't show them what their generosity is making possible. These things are intimately tied together. Think of it this way: your mission is the evidence of the grace that fuels grateful stewardship. So then that makes giving feel like a privilege. It's a joy for me to give my time and my talent, my treasure, and more for this mission that we're all on together as a community of faith. And that joy and that privilege of being a steward only happens if the church is doing that work of articulating its mission. So how do you do that? We're going to look at 4 areas. First is answering the question, what are we actually for? Then moving from being vague to being vivid, just as Jesus was so vivid in the passage from Luke that we looked at briefly. Then we'll talk a little bit about the why behind the ask, and then finally give you a way to put together a sentence that could be a first step towards a missional ask. All right, so what are we actually for? One of my favorite passages of scripture, Jesus tells us that we are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. We are for living as people on a mission for God, and for letting God's love for the world be revealed through us. So practically speaking, what does that mean for your church's mission? Here are 3 questions that you can ask. What community needs do you exist to meet? Not what programs do you offer, but the need that you are meeting. So your church may have a food pantry. A lot of our Moravian churches are involved in feeding ministries. The need that you are meeting is dignity for people in poverty. You might offer a recovery group, but the need you're meeting is support for people in addiction, right? So there's a difference between the program, the what, and that need that's being met. So last week we talked about the breadth beyond money pillar for stewardship as being really important. That's time, talent, treasure, and more. The same is true for your mission. It needs breadth. So it needs to speak to the needs that you are existing to meet, not just by money, but by the full scope of everyone's generosity, right? So volunteers, neighbors, advocates, folks in the community can be part of meeting this need with you. Our second question is, who are you for? Most churches would say, we're for everyone. And I think in the theological sense, that is certainly true. But missionally, churches should be specific about who they are called to serve. The neighborhood, the marginalized, the refugee, the family. Naming the who doesn't mean you're excluding anyone, but it just focuses that energy and it helps people better understand your mission when they understand who you are for. And then finally, as we are considering what we are actually for as churches, we ask, what would be lost if we ceased to exist? Our members would have to find another church is not the answer that you're looking for here. But if you could say, if ex-Moravian Church closed its doors, 32 families would lose their only source of emergency food assistance, or our neighborhood high school would lose 20 tutors and mentors who are working to ensure that students stay in school. Then you've got a mission if you can answer in that way. And that's a really compelling reason to ask for support. So again, what community needs does your church exist to meet? Who are you for? And what would be lost if you closed your doors? So secondly, for mission to be part of the foundation of any ask, churches have to move from being vague to being vivid. So again, back to what Jesus said in Luke about his own mission. He was specific about who he was for, what they needed, and what would be different because of his ministry. So there's a little portion of that verse. So first step to take to have a vivid mission is to be specific about people. Again, not the community. A lot of church mission statements say we're for the community, but who in the community specifically? Single mothers, immigrants, kids aging out of foster care, neighbors who have never set foot in a church. So specific people help you create an emotional connection with the folks that you're hoping will give of their time and energy and more to be part of your mission. Secondly, be specific about where you are. Name it. Your neighborhood, your zip code, your block, a church that knows where it's serving and communicates that rootedness is showing a commitment beyond its own doors, right? It's telling people that this isn't a place to just stay inside and we're not happy to only do things on Sunday morning within our own walls. So being able to say where you serve is really important, where your mission is, your mission field. And then third, being able to be specific about transformation. What does it look like? Not we help people in the community, that's vague, right? But what does that help actually produce? What's different in a person's life because of your church? Whether that's a family story, the neighborhood's health, whatever is, whoever's being impacted, being able to say specifically what that transformation looks like is really important. People want to support change, right? Especially people who are 50 and younger. They like to put their money and their time and energy in spaces where they can really see the impact that's happening. So being able to be specific about that is key. So a vivid mission could be something like, we exist to be a place of belonging and transformation for people on the margins of downtown Miami because we believe everyone deserves to be known, loved, and given a chance to flourish. That sounds a little bit like a stewardship belief statement, right? There's pieces in there that are similar, and that's important. You're naming what you believe, what you're doing as a result of that belief. So ideally, if you're working on both a stewardship belief statement and a mission statement, they sound like they come from the same church. They include some of the same elements. That's intentional for sure. All right, the third way that mission is the foundation of any stewardship invitation or ask is that it's giving you the why, and there's a sequence that why follows. And that this is some scripture that came to mind for me about the why. Why are we doing anything? Why are we on this mission? We're God's field. We're God's building. We're co-workers in God's kingdom. All right, so let's look at that sequence. First, need. So what is missing or broken or unequal in your community? Then the mission, here is why we exist. We're doing something about that need. Then the impact, here's what's already happened because people are giving their time, their talent, their treasure, etc., and more for this mission. And then finally comes your invitation. So you didn't jump straight into asking, you articulated first the need, what you're doing to meet about that need to make a difference, the impact that's already happening, and then you're asking people to come alongside and to join it. Oftentimes, financial stewardship, again, we tend to go straight to worst of case scenario, a budget number. But if you're leading with those three components there, need, mission, and impact, then the invitation becomes almost natural. And again, people are excited. They feel the joy and the privilege of getting to be a part of this work that's going to help meet that need and make an impact. Again, you're not asking people to fund an institution. You're not asking people to help the church keep its doors open, but you're inviting them into this active work of the church, God's work through your congregation. All right, so finally, you're going to create a sentence that puts all of this together. And here, this is just a simple formula. Maybe. All right, there we go. So we exist to blank, that's your change, for who, in what place, because we believe what. So this is what you believe about God, what you believe about people, what you believe about possibility. There's a lot of flexibility here, but again, you've got that need in there, the impact you're trying to have, who you're serving, and where you're doing that work as fundamentals of your belief or your mission sentence or statement. And now let's look at a couple of examples. We exist to restore hope and belonging for families in our immediate neighborhood because we believe every person is made in the image of God and no one is meant to walk through life alone. I like this one because I thought of several Moravian churches around the United States that are in downtown locations. We exist to awaken purpose, spiritual renewal for young professional students in our downtown. We believe God meets people in the middle of their busiest, most uncertain seasons, not just on the other side of them. So I would tell you, of all the churches I've gotten to work with, very few have mission statements that are this outwardly focused and specific. So you may be thinking right now, gosh, I cannot imagine the people in my congregation being able to make this leap. This feels like a really far step. But I think you can still take some of those fundamentals and put together something that's more powerful in terms of a mission sentence or statement than not having anything, right? So if you're already kind of scratching your head and thinking, whoof, I cannot imagine that we would get there. I would love to join you for the challenge to get you there, but also know there's some flexibility here where I think, again, if you have those elements in the statement, they can be really powerful and compelling, even if your church has a hard time naming a specific zip code or area, which I know for many that would be a big ask. All right, so let's connect briefly our mission piece with our stewardship piece from last week. And think about those four components of a stewardship belief statement. How does that translate into this mission space? So last week we talked about any stewardship belief statement being anchored in God as the source of all that we have. So if God is the source of everything, then the mission is the response. It's not generated by the church. It's a response to God's generosity and how we discern God's call as congregations to be doing God's work in the world, right? So the church is not, the good news is you don't have to invent this mission and then ask God to get involved with it and bless it. You get to discern what God is already doing in your neighborhood, in your area, and join in that work. So that's a really big move to go from that institutional sort of focus to the Spirit-led mission. And it really impacts how you articulate what you're about. So mission is the response to recognizing that God is the source of everything and that we want to be part of God's work with all of that God has entrusted to us. Second, like there's a delay on my screens coming in. Last week we talked about stewardship as an identity. It's who we are as children of God, as followers of Christ. So if stewardship is who we are, not just what we do, then mission is the expression of that identity. It's a church that has that concept of themselves as stewards will almost inevitably turn outward towards community needs. So the belief statement forms the people. This is who we are and what we believe about stewardship, and the mission then focuses the energy of the people. So here's how we get involved in God's work, meeting needs, having an impact with people in our neighborhood. So you can't sustain mission work, mission engagement without that identity foundation. And it's hard to fully live out your identity as a steward without a mission to be a part of, right? So I may understand I'm a steward, I am called and invited by God to give generously, but if I go to my church and I see we've become inwardly focused, we're no longer doing anything in the neighborhood, all of our programs are only serving our own members, that may not feel right to me as for my understanding as a steward. So oftentimes when we see movement in churches and get to talk to people about that, many of them will say it's because my church just started becoming really inwardly focused and only concerned about keeping the lights on, and we wanted to be part of active mission in the community. So just be aware of that. Again, mission is the expression that comes as a result of our understanding who we are as stewards. Then last week we talked about breadth beyond money, that stewardship is not just about what we do with our wallets. And so what does that mean for mission? That means whole community engagement. So these are not just people who are writing checks. These are volunteers, again, neighbors who are invited to be part of the work that you're doing, advocates, maybe in the community, you're partnering with different community organizations who are doing work in the space where you feel your mission to be. So being able to resource that mission beyond the congregation, stewardship is wonderful. So expand your mind a little bit to say, hey, how can we get more than just members of our church involved with this mission work? I know one of you on the call this morning has a really wonderful relationship between your church and a local elementary school. So those folks at that elementary school are part of your church's mission. Even if they never darken the doorsteps for worship on Sunday, they're still engaged in the mission that you all have to make sure that that school is healthy and vital. And that's about support much greater than just money. So being able to say our mission involves not just our members here at the church, but also community partners and others who care about this kind of need is really, really key here. And then finally, last week we talked about how gratitude is the motive. If gratitude is the motive for our stewardship, then mission becomes the story of gratitude. What does that mean? The specific stories, the named people, the visible transformation and the impact gives folks something to be grateful for, something concrete. If I go to worship on Sunday and somebody stands up and talks about, we did this program and this many people came and walked away with meals and fellowship, etc., I am grateful that people spent their time and their resources to make that meal possible. That's a mission that I can believe in and want to be a part of. So you can't ask people to give from gratitude if you don't show them what their generosity has made possible that they should be grateful for, right? They're tied together. So again, the mission becomes sort of the evidence of that generous stewardship that is then fed into gratitude and leads to more generosity. So I will leave you with this question. Churches, I think the churches that will thrive in the next generation of stewardship are not necessarily the ones that have the best campaigns. I hate using that word because I don't ever think we should call stewardship a campaign. It's not, but I know a lot of churches use that term. So you can have a great campaign. You can have the sleekest online giving platform and text to give and all the different ways to give people a chance. to make a donation, but I don't know that that means that that's the key to being healthy in the future. I think the churches that will be are the ones that can say, this is what we're for. Again, asking on Sunday, what are you about? What are you for? Who are you for? Being able to say that clearly and showing how you're making a difference are the secrets to success here. And the good news is any church can have that kind of clarity, right? But again, you have to have a little bit of courage and do a little bit of work to get specific, to name the need and tell the truth about the impact that you're having. So again, not a campaign, but you're starting with a conversation. Whether it's with board, key leaders, folks that are just really excited about being part of your community of faith. Sometimes those are folks that might not currently be serving on your board, whoever you think would be open to having a conversation about this kind of mission and what it means to be your church and your neighborhood at this moment in time, meeting what need for who. I think those are the folks that you want to talk to. MMFA is happy to help. We have all kinds of mission exploration resources and tools. If you say we already have a mission statement, it's great. We've got some good tools to say, okay, now what are you doing with it? How are you making sure that it's a living mission and not just a statement? So we can provide support there. And I'm always happy to lead board sessions or appropriate folks involved, stewardship committee, whomever you got, to talk about mission discovery and how to weave mission into your stewardship activities. So again, happy to help.